She was mocked, misunderstood, and left in silence. For years, her womb remained empty while her rivals' children filled the house with laughter. Every prayer seemed unanswered, every tear ignored. But one night in a temple at Shiloh, Hannah prayed a prayer so powerful it shook heaven and changed the destiny of a nation. The sun was setting over the hills of Ramah, painting the horizon with strokes of crimson and gold. Inside Elkanah's household, all seemed peaceful, but behind the laughter of children and the noise of daily life, there was one woman who lived in silence. Her name was Hannah. She was beautiful, graceful, and deeply loved by her husband. Elkanah's heart belonged to her more than to anyone else, yet in those days, love alone was not enough. A woman's honor was tied to her children, and Hannah had none. Every morning she rose with a smile, serving her husband and the family. But when she walked through the courtyard, she could not escape the sound of children's voices calling mother, voices that were not hers to claim. They belonged to Peninnah, the other wife, the woman who had many sons and daughters, and who never missed an opportunity to remind Hannah of her emptiness. Sometimes Peninnah's words cut sharper than a knife. "Perhaps if you prayed harder," she would sneer, "the Lord might bless you too. But maybe he has closed your womb forever." Surrounded by her children, Peninnah spoke with pride, her taunts like daggers to Hannah's heart. Hannah said nothing. She swallowed her tears, offering no reply, because to answer would only feed her rival's cruelty. But inside, her heart bled. She carried a sorrow too heavy for words, the sorrow of longing for something everyone else seemed to have, while heaven itself remained silent. Elkanah tried to comfort her. At feast days, he gave her the best portion of food, the choicest cut, as if to remind her that she was his favorite. And when her face grew pale from weeping, he would sit beside her and whisper, "Hannah, why do you cry? Why will you not eat? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?" His love was real, his words tender, but they could not ease the ache in her soul. For her deepest longing was for a child, and only God could give that gift. Night after night, when the household grew quiet, Hannah would slip away into the dark. She would stand under the stars, her face streaked with tears, whispering into the heavens, "Lord, remember me. Do not forget your servant. Why must my womb remain empty? Why must my heart be crushed?" Her voice trembled, but no answer came. Only the sound of the wind in the olive trees, only the silence of the night. Still, she clung to faith. She remembered Sarah, who had borne Isaac in her old age. She remembered Rachel, who cried out to God and was given Joseph. She remembered the stories passed down through generations, stories of a God who hears, even when his answer tarries. And though the waiting felt endless, a flicker of hope burned within her heart. If God did it for them, he can do it for me. The years passed, and each journey to Shiloh grew heavier. Shiloh, the place of worship, where families gathered to present offerings before the Lord. For others, it was a time of joy, of celebration, of thanksgiving. But for Hannah, it was a reminder of what she lacked. Peninnah always made sure of that. Surrounded by her children, she flaunted her blessing in the very house of God, and her mocking words echoed in Hannah's soul until her spirit felt crushed to the ground. One particular year, as they prepared for the pilgrimage, Hannah walked the dusty road beside Elkanah. Her steps were slow, her eyes fixed on the ground. She carried not only her family's offering, but also the weight of her unspoken prayers. The other families sang along the way, their children laughing and running ahead. Hannah walked in silence, her heart aching with every sound of joy around her. That night, as she lay awake in Shiloh, she pressed her face into her hands. She could hear the sounds of Peninnah's children sleeping in the next tent, their small voices sighing softly in rest. And with every breath they took, Hannah felt her heart break all over again. She whispered into the darkness, her voice almost lost in the night air. "Lord, how long must I endure this? How long will you look upon me and not answer? Have you truly forgotten me?" Her tears streamed freely, her shoulders shook, and she poured out her grief in silence, as if only the stars could hear. Yet even in her sorrow, she did not curse God. She did not turn away. Instead, she carried her pain back into his presence again and again, hoping, believing, waiting. For deep in her spirit, she knew the God of Israel does not forget. And so the story of Hannah begins, not with laughter, not with joy, but with pain. The kind of pain that presses a woman to her knees, that forces her to cry out beyond words, that tests the very limits of faith. She was broken, mocked, and misunderstood, but she was not abandoned. Though heaven seemed silent, God was closer than she knew. This was the silent pain of Hannah, and it was this very pain that would become the seed of a miracle that would not only change her life, but alter the destiny of a nation. The pilgrimage to Shiloh had always been heavy for Hannah, but this year felt different. From the moment they arrived, her soul was raw, her body weary from holding back tears. The air buzzed with the sound of families preparing their offerings, lambs bleating, children running barefoot through the courtyards, mothers calling out instructions. Joy was everywhere, but Hannah's heart beat with sorrow. Elkanah, faithful as ever, presented the sacrifice for his household. He placed food before Peninnah and her children, and then before Hannah. To her he gave the choicest portion, his eyes filled with affection. But when she looked at the plate, her stomach turned. She could not eat. The weight in her chest had crushed even her appetite. Peninnah noticed. She always noticed. With a sly smile, she leaned closer, her voice sharp enough for Hannah alone to hear. "So many children, so much blessing," she whispered, gathering her daughters around her. "What a pity you'll never know this joy. Perhaps God has closed your womb forever." The words landed like stones. Hannah's lips trembled, but she forced them shut. The table blurred through her tears. Elkanah reached for her hand again, his voice pleading, "Hannah, why do you weep? Why will you not eat? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?" But this time his love could not soothe her. The wound was too deep. The bitterness in her soul had risen to the surface, and she could no longer keep it locked away. When the meal ended and the courtyard grew quiet, Hannah rose from her seat. She walked past the tents, past the laughter of families, until she reached the temple. The lamps inside flickered softly, casting long shadows across the pillars. Eli, the old priest, sat near the entrance, his heavy eyes half closed as he watched the worshippers come and go. Hannah stepped inside, her chest heaving with unspoken pain. She fell to her knees, trembling, her lips moving soundlessly as tears poured down her face. For years she had prayed, but this time something broke. It was no longer a gentle plea. It was a cry from the depths of her soul, raw and desperate. "Lord Almighty," she whispered, though no sound escaped her lips, "if you will only look upon your servant's misery, if you will remember me and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. All the days of his life, he will belong to you." Her whole body shook as she prayed. Her shoulders hunched, her lips quivered, her voice stuck in her throat. To anyone watching, it looked strange, even unseemly. And indeed, Eli noticed. From his seat, the old priest frowned. He saw her lips moving, her face drenched in tears, but he heard no sound. No. He rose slowly, walked toward her, and with suspicion in his voice said, "Woman, how long will you stay drunk? Put away your wine." The words cut deep, not because they were true, but because even here, in her most vulnerable moment, she was misunderstood. Still kneeling, Hannah looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. "No, my lord, she replied softly. "I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not take your servant for a worthless woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." Her honesty stilled him. The sharpness in his eyes softened, and his voice lowered. "Go in peace," Eli said, "and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." Something shifted in that moment. Hannah rose to her feet, and though her eyes were still red from weeping, a strange peace settled on her spirit. She walked back to the camp, and for the first time in years, her heart felt light enough to eat, her face no longer downcast. The breaking point had come. She had poured out her pain before the Lord, and though she had not yet seen the answer, she believed. For the first time, Hannah felt that heaven had heard. The night at Shiloh was calm, the air thick with the scent of burning sacrifices. Families slept in their tents, but Hannah lay awake with her eyes open, staring at the dark canvas above her. For the first time in years, her tears had dried. A quiet assurance, fragile but real, had settled in her heart. Eli's words echoed softly in her mind. "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked." She did not know when or how. She did not know if her body would change, or if her arms would ever hold a child. But something within her had shifted. She had left her pain at the altar, and in exchange, she carried hope. The next morning, Hannah rose before the others. She dressed simply, tied her wrapper firmly around her waist, and stepped out into the courtyard. The dawn light painted the land in shades of rose and gold. As the first songs of birds filled the air, she lifted her face to heaven. Her lips parted into the faintest smile. For years, Shiloh had been a place of sorrow for her, but now it was holy ground. When the family returned to Ramah, life resumed its familiar rhythm. The chatter of Peninnah's children, the daily tasks of cooking, grinding grain, and drawing water. Yet Hannah was different. She no longer carried her sorrow like a cloak. Her laughter returned in small bursts. Her appetite came back, and her steps grew lighter. Elkanah noticed. He watched her closely, perhaps still puzzled, but relieved to see the shadow lifting from her face. And then quietly, without fanfare, the God of Israel remembered Hannah. One evening, after the day's work was done, she felt the first stirrings in her body, subtle signs, almost impossible to believe. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her stomach. A single thought broke through her silence. Could it be? Days turned to weeks, and hope blossomed into certainty. Hannah was with child. When she told Elkanah, his eyes widened with awe. He wrapped her in his arms, his voice choked with joy. "The Lord has heard," he whispered. And though Peninnah still lingered in the household, her words no longer mattered. Hannah carried within her a promise too great to be mocked. Months passed and the child grew. Hannah's body, once marked by emptiness, swelled with life. Every flutter within her womb was a reminder of God's faithfulness. Every kick was proof that her prayers had not been in vain. And when the appointed time came, Hannah gave birth to a son. She held him close, her eyes flooding with tears that were no longer bitter but sweet. She named him Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him." Each syllable of his name carried the weight of her vow, a permanent reminder of the night she poured out her soul before God. But Hannah's story was not just about receiving. It was about surrender, for she had made a promise. If God gave her a son, she would give him back. The vow was not a passing word, spoken in a moment of desperation. It was a covenant she intended to keep. In those first tender months, as she nursed Samuel, she whispered prayers over him. She sang lullabies that were less about sleep and more about destiny. She cradled him in her arms, but deep within, she knew these moments were fleeting. This child was not hers to keep. he was God's. And so, when Samuel was weaned, Hannah prepared for another journey to Shiloh. This time, her heart was not heavy with sorrow, but steady with resolve. She carried her young son in her arms, his tiny hands clutching at her wrapper, his wide eyes filled with innocence. Elkanah walked beside her, silent but supportive, knowing the weight of what they were about to do. When they arrived at the temple, the same place where her tears had once stained the floor, Hannah stood tall. She sought out Eli, the priest who had misunderstood her prayers, but later blessed her. With Samuel at her side, she spoke words that trembled with both pride and sacrifice. "My Lord, as surely as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you, praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to him." Eli looked at her, then at the child. And in that holy moment, Samuel, the boy born of sorrow and prayer, was dedicated to God. Hannah placed him in the care of the priest, her arms suddenly empty, but her heart full. She had kept her vow. Her pain had birthed a promise, and through Samuel, God was about to change the course of a nation. The temple at Shiloh was quiet when Hannah placed Samuel in Eli's hands. For a long moment, she stood there, her arms empty yet strangely light, as though she had laid down more than her son. She had laid down her past, her shame, her sorrow. The child she once begged for with tears was no longer just hers. He belonged to the Lord. Elkanah stood beside her, silent and steady, watching the scene with reverence. Samuel, still a small boy, clung briefly to his mother's wrapper before toddling forward toward Eli. His wide eyes took in the sacred place, the altar, the lampstand, the solemn priest who now bent down to meet him. It was the first step of a journey that would shape the destiny of a nation. Hannah's heart swelled, not with grief, but with gratitude. She had waited in silence for years, endured mockery and tears, but here, standing in the temple, she realized something profound. God had remembered her. Not only had he opened her womb, but he had turned her pain into purpose. That night, as families prepared to return home, Hannah lingered by the sanctuary. She did not weep as she had before. Instead, her lips parted in prayer, but this time, it was not a prayer of pleading. It was a prayer of praise. "My heart rejoices in the Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. "My horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance." Her words grew stronger, echoing through the temple courts. She declared that the Lord brings death and makes alive, that he humbles the proud and lifts the lowly, that he raises the poor from the dust and seats them with princes. It was no longer just Hannah speaking. It was prophecy, a declaration of who God is, spoken by a woman whose sorrow had become song. Samuel remained in Shiloh, growing under the care of Eli. Hannah and Elkanah returned home, but they never forgot him. Each year, when they came for the yearly sacrifice, Hannah brought with her a little robe she had sewn with her own hands. It was a mother's gift, stitched with love and prayers. Each time she placed it over his shoulders, she felt both the ache of distance and the joy of destiny. Samuel was not at her side, but he was in God's hands, and that was enough. The Lord, who had remembered Hannah once, did not forget her again. In the years that followed, he blessed her with more children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. The woman who was once mocked as barren now became the mother of many. Her household was filled with laughter, the sound she had once longed for. Yet in all her joy, she never lost sight of the boy she had given away. For Samuel was the proof of her vow, the living answer to her prayer. Meanwhile, in Shiloh, the child grew. Samuel's footsteps echoed through the temple courts, his small hands learning the duties of service, his ears slowly being tuned to the voice of God. Though still a boy, he carried a presence that set him apart. Those who saw him whispered that the Lord's favor rested on him, and indeed it did. For Samuel was not an ordinary child. He was the fulfillment of a prayer that had pierced the heavens, the beginning of a story that would shake kings and nations. The God who remembered Hannah had not just given her a son, he had given Israel a prophet. As Hannah looked back on her journey, the long nights of tears, the cruel words of Peninnah, the misunderstood prayers, she understood something she had not before. The silence of God had not been his absence. It had been his preparation. Every delay had shaped her faith. Every tear had watered the seed of destiny. Every prayer had paved the way for a child who would change history. And so the woman who once walked in shame became a symbol of hope. Her story was no longer about barrenness. It was about a God who remembers. The temple in Shiloh still echoed with Hannah's song long after her voice had faded. What began as a whispered prayer of pain had now become a declaration of victory. She had tasted the bitterness of shame, but now her lips overflowed with prophecy. She had been the woman mocked for her barrenness, but now she spoke as one who knew the power of a God who lifts the humble and scatters the proud. My heart rejoices in the Lord. My strength is exalted in my God. Her words were not just poetry. They were revelation. They carried the weight of her journey, years of waiting, years of weeping, years of surrender, all transformed into praise. She had discovered that the same God who closes a womb can also open it, that the same God who allows sorrow can also birth joy. Back in Ramah, her life filled with the laughter of children. Sons and daughters played at her feet, their voices rising like music in the courtyard. But even in the midst of that blessing, Hannah never forgot the child she had dedicated to the Lord. Each year, as she wove a new robe for Samuel, she stitched her prayers into the fabric. With every thread, she whispered, "Guide him, Lord. Let his life speak of you." And God answered. In Shiloh, Samuel grew in stature and in favor with both God and men. Under Eli's watch, the boy learned to tend the lamp of the sanctuary, to sweep the courts, to serve in silence. But there was more in him than duty. His spirit was being prepared for the voice that would one day call his name in the stillness of night. Samuel, the child born of tears, was destined to be the prophet who would anoint kings. Hannah's story was no longer hers alone. It had spilled over into Israel's destiny. For through Samuel, God would raise a nation, guide his people, and shift the course of history. And it all began with a woman who prayed through her pain. The years could not erase the memory of that vow. The nation would remember her not as the barren woman mocked by her rival, but as the mother of Samuel, the prophet, the judge, the kingmaker. Her shame had become her testimony, and her testimony became Israel's hope. In the silence of her room, Hannah would sometimes lift her voice again in song, not a cry of despair, but a melody of victory, that the Lord brings down the proud and lifts up the broken, that he makes the barren woman a joyful mother of children, that no human cruelty or misunderstanding can silence the God who remembers. Her life stood as proof that faith is not wasted, that tears are not forgotten, that vows spoken in anguish can echo into eternity. Hannah had prayed for a son, and God gave her more than she asked. He gave her Samuel, and through Samuel, he gave her a legacy that would change a nation. So the story of Hannah closes not in silence, but in song. A song that declares across generations, the God who remembers is still the God who answers. The God who lifts the lowly is still the God who reigns. This is the victory of Hannah, the woman who prayed through pain and changed a nation. And so ends the story of Hannah, the woman who prayed through her pain and whose faith gave birth to a prophet who changed a nation. Her life is a reminder that even when heaven seems silent, God has not forgotten you. He still sees, he still remembers, he still answers. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs hope today. And if you want to hear more powerful Bible stories told in this way, Make sure to subscribe to Bible Stories Explained and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Thank you so much for watching. May the God who remembered Hannah remember you too. Until next time, stay blessed.